It's taken me some time to admit this, but I think I might be in a toxic relationship with Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop. I've rarely felt this way about a video game before, where my obsessive, undying love for it feels like a consequence of the parasitic burrowing of its obtuse mechanics into my brain. When I think about it in the shower, or while working, or while walking my dog, I feel a bizarre combination of both dread and impatience toward the idea of playing it again. This self-proclaimed roguelite fix-em-up, having assigned itself a genre I've never heard of and am unsure even existed before now, is both one of the most painstakingly original and shamelessly sadistic games I have ever played. There is so much I utterly adore and passionately detest about it that giving it a firm recommendation one way or another is going to be nearly impossible. But I sure as hell am going to try, because while this game, arguably more than most others, is absolutely not for everyone, the people it is for are going to want to hear about it. Hear me out first though. If indie gaming coverage is something that really tickles your acorns, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and, dare I say, check us out on Patreon, where becoming a subscriber can earn you awesome perks like access to our Discord community and much, much more. In Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop, you play as Wilbur, a four-eyed sort of cat thing, passing his days as a spaceship mechanic under the watchful eye of your not-so-friendly corporate overlord, Uncle Chop. As you make your way through each day's repairs, you'll interact with a variety of characters who range from mildly offbeat to really fucking weird. And in the process, you'll accidentally join a multi-level marketing scheme, listen to an alien's inner monologue about his own inadequacies, visit an underground speakeasy, try to sneakily break into a customer's onboard safe, and so much more that's not worth it to spoil. Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop is a silly game and often a pretty funny one, though be aware that despite its cute exterior, this one is absolutely not for children. So what actually is Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop, other than a name I dare you to say 10 times fast without accidentally starting to call it Uncle Rock's Pocket Cock, which would be a great name for an adults-only geology game, but perhaps not this? Well, the best way I can describe it is to say it's a roguelike game where the core gameplay loop is a single-player twist on the relatively niche VR-only indie game called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. Much like that game, Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop's gameplay is completely incomprehensible without its extensive in-game manual. That's because it refuses to dumb down the process of being a fictional spaceship mechanic even for a second, and demands that every iota of this completely made-up job has a game mechanic attached to it. Need to fill the fuel tank on a ship, arguably the single simplest task in the entire game? Well, you'll have to find the fuel module. Flip up the fuel tank covers, slide down the primary release lever, use a manual wrench to carefully unscrew each bolt on the fuel tanks, slide down the secondary release levers and lift the tanks out of the module and into your inventory. And that is just to remove the fuel tanks. What I didn't cover was the process of refilling them, which is its own journey to ensure you have the right fuel type selected, that the fuel tank is securely locked into place, and that you fill it up only to the level you need, lest it overfill and become a broken pile of scrap, at which point you have to buy a replacement from the on-site vendor using your own meager funds. It's worth restating, that is the simplest job the game can possibly present to you, and you would have no idea whatsoever how to do it if not for the in-game manual, which will be your holy grail throughout this process. The manual is a massive piece of documentation full of well over 150 pages of diagrams, troubleshooting tips, crucial notes scribbled into its margins, and a comprehensive indexing system that will allow you to know exactly where to look for each job based on a symbol printed on the repairable module itself. Does the fuel refill job sound like a lot? Well, it is, at least the first time you do it. In fact, the first time I played Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop, I unambiguously hated it, finding that its complete lack of any hand-holding gave me all sorts of Dark Souls flashbacks I never needed or asked for. This is a game that tosses you in the deep end without teaching you how to swim and then points and laughs at your struggle. But then something magical happened. I started to figure it out. The manual may sometimes feel like it needs its own manual, but all the information you need is there. And once you learn how to do a simple refueling job, it feels like you know it inside and out. Before long, even some of the more complex jobs the game game demanded of me felt so second nature that I didn't need to reference the manual at all. Oh, the oil module refuses to vent heat and has random particles floating in the oil? No problem, let's unscrew the outer casing, replace the broken heat vent, add in the fuel pump, thoroughly rinse out the dirty oil and give it all a fresh refill, making sure to screw everything back in place exactly how I found it. Good as new. There are an enormous number of different modules to learn, and the sheer creativity of these never cease to astound me, with some of them even being games within games, such as the encoder module that required you to complete a Game Boy-esque platforming level in order to wrap up your repair. It sounds crazy, but Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop, as much as it's an extremely demanding and precise puzzle game at its core, at times feels like the purest interpretation of a role-playing game. One without explicit stats or levels, but where progression comes in the form of knowledge. It makes you feel like a spaceship mechanic servicing alien ships, one whose job is challenging and punishing in ways that may be temporarily frustrating, but create such an interesting thematic harmony with its gameplay that it's hard to come away unimpressed. In a way, it's a game that can't accomplish what it's aiming to unless it demands that steep learning curve to force you to figure out how to do your job. It's an easier thing to come to terms with now than it was in the 20 minutes I stared through the section of the manual describing what the hell a honk pancake stacker is and how to use it while being ready to throw my controller through the wall, but something about the trials and tribulations of that effort felt valuable and rewarding. It's really like a Souls-like interpretation of a puzzle game, absolutely infuriating in all of the moments before everything just clicks. And the sheer immersion resulting from that cannot be discarded, even if the friction doesn't always feel necessary. Because, as you might imagine from the many ways I've described this game so far, what's here is extremely clever, but at the moment, very, very far from perfect in a variety of ways. So to start, let's talk about its structure. Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop is a roguelite. That means every time you fail enough jobs to be unable to make rent, you'll have to start all over from the beginning with only your personal knowledge and meta progression upgrades you've purchased being kept intact. These upgrades have a separate currency that will be granted to you via certain customers or special events, and can be used in Wilbur's creepy, shady basement to buy things like an automatic bump in the job's pay on days that rent is due, or the ability to prevent cheap, simple refueling jobs from appearing on the job board. These upgrades can certainly be helpful from run to run, but in the game's current state, not all of them work. It's frustrating to buy an upgrade that prevents refueling jobs from wasting your effort on a meager payout, only to end up getting those jobs anyway because the game seemingly doesn't recognize that you shouldn't. But other deeper frustrations emerge quickly. For one, storage space in your garage does not persist between runs, nor does the variety of purchasable tool upgrades. This means every time you fail, you'll have to not only buy the same machines over and over again, some of which are required for specific jobs, but you'll also have to buy the pricey storage space that holds them. Given that the game only allows one storage spot by default, and there's currently a bug not allowing you to move a machine once you've already placed it, some jobs early in the game become literally impossible to complete in full and resulted in sadistic penalties that might have you owing rather than gaining money on a job because you couldn't access the machine you needed to do it. Even worse though is the variety of instant death scenarios that can pop up throughout a run. Now, a steep learning curve and severe financial punishments for messing up repairs are one thing, but in one scenario, a guy with multiple time bombs strapped to his ship forced me to defuse them all, with one mistake resulting in an entire end to my run. Another time, my customer was actually trying to rob me, and when I chose the dialogue option saying I didn't have money to steal, he simply shot me dead and also ended my run. While there are ways to deal with these situations that obviously don't result in your death, the pain of losing over an hour of progress because of a 5-second stint where I chose the wrong dialogue option will not soon be forgotten. This is design that doesn't reward attention to detail so much as it utterly crucifies you for lacking it. And even in its pursuit of an immersive, consequential experience can end up feeling deeply unfair. Next, let's talk about its two main modes, frantic fixing versus focused fixing. Frantic fixing mode puts Wilbur on a timer and gives him a variety of less time-consuming jobs to do with lighter penalties for mistakes. Focused fixing mode forgoes the timer but only allows you to take up to 3 jobs a day and ensures that those jobs are frequently quite complex with major financial penalties for even relatively minor mistakes. After spending time in both, I can honestly say I don't see how it's even possible to play in Frantic Fixing mode unless you already know the game inside and out. Frantic Fixing mode's timer is so brutal that you don't have time to go digging through the manual for obscure details around what type of blinker fluid to use for a spaceship's headlights or how to successfully disable a security alarm that's gone haywire. You better already know how to do that stuff, or Frantic Fixing mode will eat you for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a light midnight snack. It's also likely that if you're playing on a controller, Frantic Fixing mode may feel quite nearly impossible, even once you've committed the game's massive manual practically to memory. The game is perfectly playable with a controller, and on Steam Deck for that matter, but the integration of it feels so clunky and slow that selecting the specific parts of each module that you'd like to is often an exercise in trial and error that hardly feels like a good use of time. Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop feels completely designed for a mouse and keyboard, with even convenient features like the ability to pin the manual to a specific part of your screen while doing a repair being exclusively for use with a keyboard and mouse, but simply impossible on controller. Focused fixing is where a vast majority of you will want to spend your time, but even there, the penalties for getting even a couple of minor things incorrect can result in a net loss on any given job, making near total perfection a requirement to make meaningful progress. But thankfully, you can at least take all the time you want on each job, though the care and energy required to learn each new module from scratch is likely to burn you out well before any given play session gets too long. The ability to save after each in-game day is certainly a godsend because these runs can be quite long, and you're not likely to get through one without a lot of manual referencing, unless you're unnaturally talented at what's essentially the gaming equivalent of assembling obscure IKEA furniture. While its gameplay drunkenly toes the line between sheer brilliance and callous sadism like a gymnast with vertigo, Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop's presentation has all the charm of a solid adult cartoon. You'll encounter characters like a cat who's clearly not an alien pretending to be a cat, your boss who will compliment how soft your fur looks and tell you he won't touch it but wants you to know how tempting it is, and patrons of the shop talking about what it would be like to eat each other's shit. It's about as subtle as if Tim Robinson wrote a Rick and Morty spinoff, but in its own screwed up way that's honestly a compliment. The visuals are colorful and crude, its various machines have a stunning variety of creative presentations, and its music, while kind of repetitive, is certainly decent enough. Ultimately, Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop knows exactly what it wants to be, and manages to get most of the way there with just some excruciatingly annoying bugs and regrettably unforgiving design decisions getting in the way of that. Mark my words, the people who love this game are going to love it a lot, and the numerous people who hate this game will have a hard time not at least respecting it. I, for one, deeply love it, but also kind of don't like it. Our toxic relationship shall, at least for now, be firmly in the realm of it's complicated. Here at I Dream of Indie Games, we believe games of all sorts deserve to be more than a numerical score and rate games with bronze, silver, or golden genie lamps of approval signifying good, great, or essential recommendations, respectively, with the rusty lamp indicating mediocrity and the indie Krampus best left unspoken about unless a game is truly a mess. With some tweaks to design and essential bug fixes, Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop could be one of the best games to have released in 2024. As is, warts and all, it remains a solid recommendation and gets the bronze genie lamp of approval.